and Jamie, if he cares to, will have the first response. James Galbraith is one of the most frequently cited economists in the United States. As you know, I'm just looking. He's the Lloyd Benson Junior Chair. I always find that a little incongruous, Jamie, but the Lloyd Benson. Those of you who don't remember, Benson was the first Treasury Secretary, and he was a senator under Clinton, and a senator from Texas. But in any case, his title, Chair in Government Business Relations at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, University of Texas, Austin. Jamie, please talk a little bit about whether the euro will survive, maybe a little bit about democracy. I'd like to get back to that because it's having some trouble in the U.S. also. And maybe some of the things that have to be done if the euro is to survive.
Okay. I find it useful to rephrase the question in a more precise way so that I can give it a clear answer. The question I would ask is, can the Eurozone survive with its full complement of current members under the current policies by which it's governed? And my answer to that is in the range of uncertainty between very unlikely and impossible. What we are seeing in the south of Europe, and especially in Greece, but not only in Greece, is the effective social and economic destruction of the smaller member states of the Eurozone. We are not seeing a policy that will lead to a return of competitiveness, to a return of confidence in the credit markets, to economic recovery. We are seeing policies which are effectively dismantling what were already fragile systems of basic education, public health, public infrastructure, social services. We are seeing the rise of hunger, homelessness, vast unemployment, and with that, the rise of political violence, extremist violence coming from the far right. Just a few days ago, an artist in Greece was murdered by a gang of Nazi thugs. That's emblematic of the direction that things are taking in the small countries of the periphery of the Eurozone. Is the worst of the crisis over? I don't think it is. Is there a policy being directed that could bring about a recovery? No. The European Union, the troika, is conducting policy with respect to these countries like a debt collection agency. And they are imposing measures which have led, for example, to the shutdown of the state broadcasting system, which is, for all its inadequacies, the only domestic media for the discussion of political questions in the Hellenic Republic. This will lead, in the good scenario, to a political revolt at some point. That revolt may be led in Greece by the coalition of left parties, Syriza, under, I think, a very attractive young leader, Alexis Tsipras, which is a pro-European party, a party which wishes to preserve the euro, the Eurozone, and Europe, but which understands that the only way this can happen with respect to Greece is with a change in Europe's policies toward its peripheral members. Alternatively, the rebellion may come in Spain, it may come ultimately in Italy, a country so large and important to Europe that its political position cannot be ignored. Now, those rebellions haven't developed yet, but in the good scenario, they will. And a political discussion that would follow the assertion of an alternative path in Europe provides, in my view, the only hope for the preservation of the Eurozone. That is to say, a change of policies carried out by the countries that have authority in Europe, that is to say, notably by Germany, in recognition that the changing situation requires such a change. I happen to now be associated with a policy proposal which is circulated widely in Europe, co-authored with Yanis Varoufakis, leading economist from the University of Athens, and Stuart Holland, former British Labour Party parliamentarian and one of the original architects of the European Union, now at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And that proposal has 4 elements, all of which are designed very carefully to conform to the existing treaties so that they do not require the implementation of a grand project of federal union or some other perhaps not desirable political change, but in any event, political change which could not be accomplished in the time that's available. Basically, the 4 elements, to be very brief about them, are a restructuring of the sovereign debts so that they become manageable, and so that the debt burdens are put on a more or less sustainable basis. A case-by-case resolution of the bankrupt banks, which would break what is a toxic relationship between national banks and national political leaders, particularly in the south of Europe. An investment program freeing up resources and technical capacities that already exist in the European Investment Bank in order to reanimate economic activity, provide a foundation for stabilization in Southern Europe, and a program of social solidarity that would put on a common footing some core elements of meeting popular and human needs, in particular unemployment insurance, food assistance, maybe retirement. But in any event, with the view of understanding that what Europe lacks is a way of stabilizing the incomes of the most vulnerable parts of its population in the smaller peripheral countries. Northern Europe, I think that's been very clear from the comments already made in this panel, is essentially comfortable and can think in terms of the crisis as having been overcome and can have internal political agendas in Britain or in Germany which are essentially not related to the problems of the Eurozone. But the argument I would make, and the point I would make, is that the fate of the Eurozone does not rest with its large members. It rests with the smaller members. Europe has made a very interesting commitment to the viability of every member of the European Union, and especially of the Eurozone. It is now failing to meet that commitment. If it chooses to amputate a small economy, it's already basically done that with Cyprus, but it should choose to do so with Greece, which is 2% of European GDP. The consequences will be that the international community and the financial markets will immediately focus on the next potential domino to fall, which might be Ireland, might be Portugal. And when one of those goes, then the sights will shift to Spain. And the progression of crises will quickly become something way beyond the capacity of the European leadership to manage. So fundamentally, they're in a position where they have to begin to recognize that these incidental countries on the south of Europe, which they may have mistakenly admitted into the Eurozone in the first place, are now central to the survival of the project. It's entirely possible for Signor Draghi to ring-fence Portugal and Ireland and stabilize the finances and lower the yields on the bonds of those two countries. And he's in fact doing that. These are small countries, and the European Central Bank is large enough to intimidate the international investment community on this matter. I'm not so optimistic about Spain. I was in Andalusia in June, did not meet the optimists that I gather are in Madrid in September. As far as Italy is concerned, I'm a member of the Italian National Academy, the Accademia Nazionale dei Lincei, and I have Italian economist colleagues I talk to all the time, and they are not optimistic about the trajectory of the Italian economy. And Italy, of course, whatever one might say about any of the other countries, Italy is 20% of the Eurozone. So there is a significant sources of instability in both, and I think it's true of both Spain and Italy, that the games that can be played with Portugal and Ireland cannot be played with them because the governments cannot agree to the severity of the austerity measures that would be demanded. And so this is a very unstable balance at the moment. I have great respect, of course, for my economist colleagues at the OECD, but if they are right this time about the prospects for growth next year, that will be the first time in 5 years or so. Economists do this all the time. The Congressional Budget Office is no different. Always predicts that recovery will occur in full over a 5-year horizon, no matter how bad things continue to get. The reality, of course, in Greece is that for 6 years, the economy has been falling at the rate of 5% per year. It's now 30% or so below where it was before the crisis. And that is a point at which the basic core institutions of the society cease to function. A quick comment on the presence of the Chinese in Greece. I don't think it's reasonable to criticize them for having invested in the port at Piraeus, which they conduct business as an ordinary business operation by the local, that is to say, European standards. And the Chinese, on the whole, have also taken a very conservative and constructive role in Europe. And in fact, it was the Chinese who basically said to Chancellor Merkel that there should be no, as a condition of their investments, there should be no further discussion of the Greek exit from the euro. And again, it is true. And she went directly from Beijing to Athens and made the announcement that Brexit was off the table. That was the end of that. So it's not a question of the peripheral countries of Europe suddenly deciding that they would like to return or plan to return to their own currencies. I don't think they feel that they can manage that, and I think they're correct about that. It's extremely difficult to do. But it's a question of whether you will have a Cypriot situation writ large with a freezing up of accounts, capital controls, and the complete further breakdown of core economic institutions, including private companies and cooperatives. That's entirely a risk, and the political consequences in a larger country would be very serious. The consequences of a breakup of the Eurozone as a whole would be a mess. It'd be a terrible mess because you have obligations in euro, and the countries that exit would then have to somehow figure out whether those obligations were still due in euro or in the local currency. So imagine if you were selling BMWs in Rome, are you going to be repaying in a rapidly depreciating lira or in the euro currency? Obviously, BMW would take one view and the Italian government would take another, and this thing could be tied up in court for years, with the consequences that the structures of production and trade inside Europe would be severely disrupted. I think that's clear. Everybody can see that, and I think that's a major reason why the euro, having been created, cannot and should not be uncreated except at the most extreme, except under the most extreme conditions. Can those conditions be avoided? Is stabilization possible? Yes, of course it is. Stabilization is possible because the most severely affected countries are very small. The resources required to stabilize them are not very large. What is required is a change of policy. The troika cannot continue to run the European Union like a debt collection agency. If it continues to do so, the policy will continue to fail. If it shifts and pursues a policy of stabilization and solidarity, instead of, as I say, debt collection and extraction of rents, then the Eurozone can be stabilized. But the condition is a change of mind and a change of policy. I persist in being unfashionable. And I think what yesterday's discussion remains relevant because the issues have not been resolved. A few days ago, leadership of the Dutch government announced to the world that the age of the welfare state was over and everybody had to look after themselves. And if that is the emblematic of the ongoing philosophy in Europe, which it is in important parts of Europe, then the project will fail. It will fail. On the other hand, the economic management issues, which, as I said before, have to do with the public debts, which need to be restructured, with the bankrupt banks, which need to be resolved, with the failure of investment, and with the failure of social support in the periphery of Europe, these are all manageable problems. They're manageable within the existing framework of the Eurozone, and they could be dealt with. Again, whether they will be dealt with or not is up to our friends in Europe to decide, and they have not made clear what direction they plan to take.
Jamie, a couple of comments.
Just a quick clarification. I have the impression that German unemployment is low in substantial part because of work sharing and because of a large body of very low-wage jobs,
That's true.
and which have been created in recent years subsequent to the Hartz reforms. The effect on family formation of being outright unemployed and of being unemployed at an untenably low wage is very similar. You can't afford it. You can't afford it. And I think your point on immigration is very well taken. One reason we do not have this discussion to anything like this degree in the United States, where demographic patterns amongst the population of European ancestry are essentially similar to those in Europe, is that we have a large number of recent immigrants and first and second generation immigration community who are fortunately as American as anybody else in this room. And that is if you think that demography is a problem, walls and barriers to citizenship are a very bad idea.